Hi. Welcome to SPED Homeschool's very first broadcast, SPED Homeschool Conversations. And we are a place for special education homeschooling parents to come and get your cup filled. And each week, our program is going to host a very special guest. And this week is no exception as we're getting started. Our guest tonight is Jan Bedell. Jan is a neuro-developmentalist and founder of Little Giant Steps. She's also well known as the Brain Coach. And on top of that impressive resume, she is also the board chair for SPED Homeschool, which is a delight. So welcome, Jan. And I see we have an audience already here. And I just want to maybe start out with them starting to get a little bit of understanding of what your story is and how you got into homeschooling and how that kind of got the snowball going.
Well, that was a very interesting story. I have a special needs child that had a lot of issues. So we were in a private school earlier, and this is in the 80s. You know, homeschooling is not very popular back then. In fact, I was an educated teacher, and I had never heard of homeschooling before I moved to Dallas. Mm-hmm. And then it was just a providential thing because we went to a new church, and then very next week they were going to have something that was on homeschooling. And so I thought, well, I'm kind of out of options because I knew the public school was not going to be what I wanted. So I went, and from there I started homeschooling, and I homeschooled both my girls, one on each end of the spectrum, really, of intelligence, I guess you would say, or challenges. And I did that for 5 years, and then I found the neurodevelopmental approach for my daughter Janae with major issues. Mm-hmm. And I did that for another 3 years, and it just made all the difference, and that's what changed my life. I just started doing that from then on, the neurodevelopmental approach. And what's very interesting right now in the homeschooling realm is that we're in a multi-generational household. And so my grandchildren are 6, 4, and about 15 months. And so we're homeschooling them as well, of course, with the neurodevelopmental approach.
So that's awesome because, you know, I find more and more that the passion that we as moms and how God uses that to show us what his purpose is for our lives starts when we figure out why our kids were brought into our lives.
Exactly. So. Sometimes really hard things or really good things come from really hard things.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
You know, a lot of our audience, I think you know what the neurodevelopmental approach is, but some of the audience may not know what that is.
Can you explain that to us?
Yes, I just believe it's a treasure. It's like the major treasure of my life. It's neuro, having to do with the brain, mm-hmm. and then development. How do we develop as humans to get the fullest potential released in our life? That's what the whole thing is. It looks at the whole child instead of just little. You know, a lot of people that worked with my daughter early on, they had their own little microscope that they looked at from their expertise. And I had never seen anybody just look at her as a whole child and, you know, this affects that, and we have to fix this foundation before that will work. And we're over here trying to push on this to make it work when the foundation wasn't there. So no matter what the IQ is, if the brain is more efficient, it just works better. So that's what this is all about.
That's awesome. Yeah. And we're going to definitely dive into that more and kind of how that works into the everyday ins and outs of homeschooling and learning. And I'm excited about that. So tonight our topic is making learning easier. And don't we all need that? And so it's a challenge. I know, you know, I've been working in this special needs homeschooling realm for the last decade, and it's so difficult to be on the other end of the phone with parents who are just desperate and they do want to make learning easier. So tell us, it's possible?
Yeah. It really is possible. And the interesting thing is sometimes people, they find a special need with their child, but there's nothing really wrong with the child. You know, it may be an IQ issue, may not be an IQ issue, but it's kind of like a computer hooked up to dial-up internet. You're probably like not even.
Oh, I remember the days. I am that old, yes.
Okay, well, some of the others may be relating to DSL versus.
Yeah, exactly.
That kind of thing. But you know, that computer is the same if it's hooked up to dial-up or to high-speed internet. It's just those connections that make the difference. And I've just been amazed at how in public school, and maybe some of the people are homeschooling because public school just wasn't meeting their expectations, but right. It's interesting how the instructional days for the schools, they've increased the number of days, they've increased the teacher training, and they're spending all kinds of money, you know, our government's spending all kinds of money on education, and the sad fact is we're about 25th in math and reading, just in general. And then our learning challenges and disabilities are just skyrocketing. Yeah. It's really sad. But it is possible to make that difference, and the neurodevelopmental approach really gives some keys for that. We stress inputting information instead of outputting. Now, a lot of curriculums are based on output. Exactly. You know, we want those blanks filled in, right? Mm-hmm. And then we want the answer to come out, and we want it to come out quickly. So we base that typically on curriculum. And so we're always looking for the right curriculum. But what I'm going to ask you to do is think differently, because it really has to do with the brain and its efficiency, not necessarily the curriculum.
Got it. Well, that's encouraging, because, you know, that's the biggest question that I think I have gotten over the years is, what's the perfect curriculum? And I always come back and say, there is none. and that's a hard answer for parents to hear, but, you know, like what you're saying, it's, you know, they want to replicate the process that they've seen implemented in the schools. And the reason it's implemented in the schools is because it's easy to do in a mass market, you know, of a classroom. And unfortunately, it's not the best for the child. It's like what you're saying. Yeah, well, that's so encouraging. So
let me give you just an example of thinking differently. And you're going to have to just picture this and then take it out into your realm. And when you run across a FedEx truck, you'll have to look at this, because you know, we're asking you to think differently. And all these years, I have looked at a FedEx label, you know, the logo, and I've just seen FedEx. Well, if you look between the last E, the capital E, and the X, there's actually an arrow in there. And I had never seen the arrow, but you know, that's all I see now. And so it's kind of like when I look at the FedEx truck, I go, there's the arrow. And it's like it was there right in front of our eyes, but we just didn't see it. And so it's kind of like one of the things that we really push is a concept called frequency, intensity, and duration. We call that the 3 keys to learning anything. And frequency is how often we do something. You know, we want to tell them one time and they get it, right? That would be our dream. And I have to say, dream on, because that's not going to happen.
Right.
The number of times that they see it or hear it or say it, and then intensity, how strong is that information coming into them, and then duration is very, very important, because oftentimes, like you were saying, we try to model what we've seen before, 45 minutes for math and 45 minutes to an hour for reading and that kind of thing. And if you just change the duration to shorter times and more often, you get a whole different aspect. And I have a whole teaching on this. I just started a YouTube channel, and it's called, The 3 Keys to Learning Anything. And they can find that at Brain Coach Tips on YouTube, a new YouTube channel we've just started. So, obviously I'm not going to be able to go into all these different things in detail here tonight, but just to give you some resources, that would be a good one to explore. So I think that will be a good one. Well, everybody wants a certain thing to happen in their homeschool, and the ones of us with special needs children are no different. We want a child that can read well and comprehend, and we want them to be great at math and stay on task and follow directions, and above all, we want them to be independent learners. I bet you've heard that before, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah. I push that for all my kids.
Yes. Well, but what I found is if we start and we look at getting a really good foundation on the brain, then they can do all those things. But oftentimes they can't do those things because of an immature central nervous system or something that's not happening right in the brain.
Yeah, and so often parents just try to take that diagnosis and make a curriculum fit for that versus really trying to figure out, like you said, back to where the struggle really is and what's going on and how can you I made a video a while ago about this too, is that, sometimes less is more. And that's really what you're saying is, less is more because the attention span is not there and you can only work so hard for so long. And right. I think as, it's just an ingrained thing that school has to last so long, and unfortunately, I think we wear our kids out through that process, and so yeah. So what do you tell parents when they come to you with a label and say, well, this is what I need fixed? Because I hear that a lot. We need to fix it, and we need to catch them up. And I hate those things.
Well, first of all, our whole motto is that to say no to labels, because labels are typically a list of symptoms, and those symptoms are caused by something in the brain. And if you really work on the root cause, those symptoms can often diminish greatly and then even go away. I worked with a couple of ladies that were 55 and 54. A lot of times people ask me, is it too late for my child? They're already 13 or they're already 10 or, 16 or whatever. And these 2 ladies had been struggling with reading comprehension all of their lives. And they were 54 and 55. Successful people, one was administrator for a Montessori school, and the other one was actually a teacher. She was a tutor for kids that had reading problems because she had so much compassion. And she didn't read anything phonetically, but her comprehension was really low. And so we were looking for the root cause of what was going on with these ladies, and we put them on a neurodevelopmental program that included some exercises for a lower level brain organization and working on their processing and where they stored information. And they both came up 3.5 years in comprehension, reading comprehension, and they didn't do any reading. Now, that kind of, really makes you think differently, right? Because everybody thinks, you have to have the right reading program, and then you have to have this. But really, if you have a more organized brain, much more can happen.
Right. So that's amazing, because we don't think in those terms. We think so segmented, this is this subject, and this is this subject, and this is how. And then when a child's not excelling in one area, we just start stuffing more information in to try to catch that area up, and yet it's it's at the foundational level, is what you're saying.
Yes,
where...
yes. And one of those foundations is the development as a child, on the floor, on their stomach. It's causing the foundation for an organized brain, and that's organized thinking, organized, your papers being organized, your room being organized. So if you have a child that you say, go clean your room, and it's worse 10 minutes after you send them in there than when you send them in there in the first place, it means that their brain is not organized to even be able to handle that. Mm-hmm. So, that lower level is really, really important. And there's a variety of in-home programs that can just give those keys to the parents so that they can take care of those things. So that's something that you can look at. I also have podcasts on a number of subjects. It's called braincoachtips.com.
Mm-hmm. And where can people find those?
You can go to just braincoachtips.com, mm-hmm. and that will give you the list that's on the Little Bit Tips website, and they'll take you directly to the one that you're interested in. So if you have a specific topic like dyslexia or ADD or autism or something like that, you can look there. Or auditory processing, that's a huge one that's coming up these days.
Right. Can you explain a little bit of what auditory processing is? Because I think when parents hear that, it kind of shoots over their head because they're used to the typical school diagnoses, but schools don't diagnose in auditory processing.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's really where a lot of the labels are coming from, is the processing is low. And what I believe is our society is really causing a lot of these, as our cultural practices change, it's robbing our children of the full academic potential that they have. One thing I think everybody's kind of keenly aware of is the screen time.
Yeah.
You just know in your gut that that's really not good for them to be doing that long. Mm-hmm. And then we've got all these gadgets that we put our infants in. And when we wrap them around us and hold them all the time, it's great for bonding, but it's not great for development. Mm-hmm. So, and we've got those little walker things that we put them in when they're 4 or 5 months old. They just seem more... I don't know, they seem more human, I guess, when they're sitting up instead of laying down. But they need to be on the floor going through those kinds of things. And then we used to talk a lot. People now you go to those anywhere and they've got their face down and texting and things like that, or looking at Facebook.
Right. At least we're talking to each other.
That's what we're talking to each other on. But, a lot of times we're not talking to our children as much, mm-hmm. and they're not developing that auditory processing. So there's some specific activities that you can do to really help with that. And we actually have a free test kit on our website, everydaysteps.com, that people can get. And you can test your child, find out where they are, and then actually have some activities that have that principle of frequency, intensity, and duration, mm-hmm. that will help the processing come up. Now, processing auditorily is holding pieces of information together in your short-term memory, mm-hmm. and then bringing it right back out.
Okay.
So, that's going to affect a ton of different things. I've got some examples of that. When you're processing information, it just globally affects the child. I just wanted to, it affects their ability to stay on task and follow directions. Sometimes people think it's a behavioral thing, but
right.
I had one friend that had a 9-year-old that had Down syndrome, and he would do sit-down strikes, on the steps of the church. Just couldn't get him to move. And he had more like a 2-digit span, and he had behavior more like a 2-year-old. So it really affects their behavior. So if we can get their processing up, then it makes all the difference in their ability to function in life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that's really so important about processing is most homeschoolers want to do phonics as far as a ability to read, and they think they're not reading. They're cheating or something if they're reading any other way besides sounding out that word. And so that's kind of ingrained in us, and so that's the direction we go. And then when our children have low processing, like my daughter, she had a 3-digit span. She could hold 3 pieces of information together. Mm-hmm. Now that child could do every sound of OUGH. She had all 70 phonograms. She knew all of that, but she could not hold those pieces together to get the word out. Mm-hmm. It was the most frustrating thing you can imagine. I don't know, maybe you've already experienced that.
Yeah, well, that's how I was when I was younger too. So I speed read, but yeah, I know the struggle.
Yes, and when you're trying to do that and you keep doing that over and over again, everybody just gets frustrated. And I don't know if you saw this, Peggy, but a lot of people have seen this thing that's gone around in the email where all the words, they did a study and all the words were spelled wrong.
Mixed up, yeah.
All the letters were mixed up except the first and last were in the right place, and you could still read it.
Yeah.
So that tells you right there that you are really a sight reader. Mm-hmm. So it's really okay to do a sight word vocabulary, work on that processing, then add the phonics back in, and it makes all the difference. It just is so huge.
Because really, as you learn words, you don't sight read unless you're sounding something new out. And
exactly. And people don't really realize that when they're thinking about reading. You really, as soon as you learn the word, you never sound it out again.
Right.
You just know the word. Mm-hmm. And so that's really important. A couple of things that I wanted to stress is, in processing was one of them, but there's 4 things that really take place in learning that have to happen. You have to receive information, and then you have to process it. That's your short-term memory. And of course, you have auditory and visual short-term memory. But the auditory is just seems to globally affect the children more than the visual. And then there's a concept called storing information, like where in the brain does that information go? Now, I don't know about you, but I've had the experience of, it just seemed like the light bulb went off, right? And she knew what to do, and I was so excited, and you bring it out the next day, and you put it in front of her, and it's like, okay, are you going to teach me this or what? Because she couldn't remember it. So that can be so frustrating for parents. I had one parent that I worked with that said her 14-year-old was still not reading, and he would they would just look under the table and under the, try to make it laugh about it because it was so unbelievable that he knew it yesterday, but he couldn't remember it today. So that we have seen is a storage issue. And when kids get under pressure, like under any kind of stress, a speed drill or a test or anything like that, then oftentimes that information just is not available to them. They go into what we call the subdominant, where their emotions are over there, but the information's not.
Right.
I remember taking tests before, and I would study hard. I'm a firstborn, want to do it right kind of thing. And I would know that material, and I would look at the test, and I could almost see it on the page, but I couldn't remember what it was. And then I would walk out the door, the pressure's off, and that would just come to me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely.
So to be able to utilize the information, all of these things have to be working well. You have to have an organized brain at that lower level so that the two hemispheres can communicate with each other. And then you have to be able to receive information. That's the information coming in appropriately. Sometimes we have kids that have hypersensitivity to sound, maybe, and that is really bothering them. So sometimes they just kind of turn off their auditory system and don't want anything coming in there because it's kind of painful. And so that channel is not working well. So instead of just, well, and here again, I'm asking you to think differently in this realm, because so many people rely on learning styles. You know what I mean? You find how they learn best, and then you teach everything that way. Well, I believe that it's very inefficient to teach like that. Now, let that soak in for just a minute, because that kind of blows people's minds sometimes. But if you think about it, there's certain information that needs to come in tactily. You know, if you wanted to get information about sand, you could look at it. You know, there's some patterns there. You can't hear sand unless it's put in a tube and pulled down, you know, and makes a sound. But to really understand about sand, you have to feel it. So tactily, that information needs to come in there. And like if you have a sunset, you can't hear a sunset, you can't feel a sunset, you have to see it. So there's certain things that need to come in efficiently, certain ways. If you were going to learn to cut hair, you would want to do it tactily. And there's certain academic things that are also that way. So if you wanted to teach math facts, for instance, you tend to see, you know, 2 + 6, and you hear in your brain 8. So it's more of an auditory. So it's best to put math facts in auditorily. But to make math easier, the process of math, the concept of addition, subtraction, multiplication, it's really visual. So let's take long division, for instance. So if you have...
I don't think I know anybody that likes long division.
Well, and what do we usually do? We say, okay, now we're going to divide, and this bracket means we're going to divide, and the number over here is called this, and the number under here is called that, and we say that and that, and we're just talking, and they're looking at us like, I know you're watching a movie, Mom, but I have no clue what you're saying. You know, because we just talk. And math operations, we found, best come in visually. So if you just say 5 goes into 2, no. 5 goes into 25, yes. How many times? You know, just those few key words, and take them step by step by step, and spend about 10 minutes or less on that, and come back and do that again, and you do a problem or two, and they do a problem after that. You cannot believe, Peggy, how much easier math is when you use that kind of technique.
Right, you're making the bridges for them instead of asking them to make them themselves, because those concepts in math are so difficult for a child to create them themselves. And I think a lot of curriculums do require our kids to do that. So that's an interesting approach. I've never looked at it that way.
Yes, and math facts, it's true for the operations. If you do a couple and then they do one, and you do a couple and they do one, and they don't make a mistake, they don't have to relearn something that they thought they knew. Right. And that takes a long time too. So if you're just sitting with them for short periods of time and doing this input, learning is so much easier. But math facts, you know what we do is we hold up those cards And I call them magic cards because they've got to be magic, or because you want something to come out of their brain, right? You've got 4 plus 5 and a blank, and then you want something to come out of their brain. Well, if it's not in there good, it's not going to come out good.
Right.
So we have a whole different system that we use called rapid recall, where in just 6 minutes a day, they see, hear, say, and write 5 math facts 14 times. Now, you would think it would take a long time, but 12 of those times is input, information going in, and only 2 times is information coming out, and it just makes all the difference.
Oh, I can imagine.
I had a lady come to the booth one time, and she said, my twins are autistic, and they hate math. Anytime I get anything out that resembles a number, they just freak out and go the other way. And she said, after a week of this, because it was just all input, and after a week of this, the child said, well, I like math. I can do this. And so those kind of things are really, really rewarding.
Awesome. Yeah. Now, you talk about plasticity, and I'd like to kind of delve into that a little bit. And because we do set limits on, this is as much as somebody can learn, and then we've hit a plateau, but that's not something you believe in. And I kind of want you to explain that so that parents know that there is not a stopping point for their child. Because I think sometimes we do, we say, okay, that's all about all we are going to get in them, and that they're going to be good to go.
Right. Well, in my training as a teacher, I wasn't trained in special ed originally. I was just trained as a kindergarten teacher. But in that kind of training, earlier on, they would not have taken a child with a 40 IQ, that they said was a 40 IQ, and tried to teach them to read at all.
Right.
They would just put them in life skills. And my daughter, they said, had a 40 IQ, and that's a whole nother topic of thinking differently, but I don't have time to go into right now. But we worked on those foundational things, and she was able to read as a hobby. She loved reading, and she didn't have the greatest comprehension, but she was able to read. So, and let me just give you another example. She was very, and I'm referring to her in the past tense because she has since gone on to be with the Lord, which was a very sad thing for us, but, she just taught me so much. She was she didn't have a good sense of where she was in space. We'd be walking down the walkway or sidewalk, and she would just push me over, and I'd be over on the grass because she didn't know where she was in space. And so by doing some activities, like one of them was deep pressure, where I just pressed on her hands, I pressed on her arms, just with deep, and pressed on her legs. And every time I pressed, I found out later what I was doing is sending a message from her finger to her brain to develop that pathway. And every time I pressed, it caused dendrites, which is what grows in your brain, to form that makes those pathways. So she would always spill milk, and you're having these. You keep saying, well, you're not being careful enough. Well, if they don't know where they are in space, they just knock over things and they push you out of the way, and they're too rough with their siblings and things like that. But by stimulating with using that frequency, intensity, and duration with specific activities, it builds new pathways that really do form and cause better function. Is that making sense?
Definitely. I think probably some of that is related to those pressure vests or the weighted blankets that that a lot of parents use too, and that seem to help kids calm down and stay focused. And
yes, it gives them, it's basically giving them enough information to know where they are. And so if you don't know where you are, you just kind of wander around until you bump into something, and then you get enough information that you go, oh, this is where I am.
Probably the information you wanted, but yes. Exactly. Oh, well, that's neat. God is so good. He's made us in such a wonderful way, and we're just starting to figure out, little pieces of that. And it's just awesome that, you have this experience that you're sharing, and we have just the ability to hear from other people that have learned as they've homeschooled their kids, that they've gotten training, and just as we've grown as individuals in teaching other people and helping them succeed, and just the lessons we learn about not only them but us in the process, and that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, the plasticity can go through every area, really. Working on your auditory processing is part of building that plasticity in that area. So the storage of information, moving things to where they need to be stored correctly. That has to do with changing the plasticity of the brain. And our brain is changing all the time. We used to, the scientists and everything, they used to think that we were hardwired about 20 years old, and it was kind of downhill from there. But
oh no.
Oh my goodness. But they found out, and if you think about it, you know that this is true, because if somebody's had a stroke and they've had damage to their brain, but they regain function, you know that plasticity is working, because otherwise they would just be in that state and it wouldn't change.
Right.
So God's given us that plasticity for all of our lives, as long as we stimulate our brain.
And that's a good point. We got to keep doing that.
Yes.
Oh, awesome. Well, we're starting to get some questions. Should we kind of move to that? The first question we have is from Amy, and she writes, my 6-year-old can memorize sight words, but struggles with phonics. He has pretty good comprehension. Any suggestions?
Well, Amy, I would definitely get that auditory test kit at littlegiantsteps.com. It's a free test kit, and test his processing, because phonics is an auditory approach, and you have to hold all those pieces together. And if the processing is low, that's a challenge, and they won't really be able to do it. And you will see, I just can't stress enough how important the auditory processing is, because you see so many changes with your child, more maturity. When they didn't remember to brush their teeth and get dressed in the morning, they'll come out all dressed and have their teeth brushed. They'll remember to feed the dog and take out the trash, all that kind of thing. That causes all kinds of conflict. You think it's behavioral, but it's really they can't hold those pieces together to remember. Well, so I would suggest that.
It's so much good confidence building on their side. And so, yeah, definitely. I've seen that in my own kids, just the ability to handle something, and just it elevates who they are. You turn around and go, whose child is that?
Exactly.
So I've got another question. It says, my daughter struggles in the area of storage, and she wants to read so bad. Any suggestions to help her out?
Okay, that's a whole different topic of a different teaching, but our whole basic concept of that is dominance, is where the information is being stored. So in other words, you have two eyes, but the brain is going to choose one to put it in storage. So there is a podcast on this, trying to think of what I think it's named, You Knew This Yesterday. what happened kind of thing. I think that's the name of it. Because if they learn it and they put it in the opposite side of their brain from where they write, then that's your dominant hemisphere, your language center is where information comes out, and then they have trouble finding it if it's stored in the wrong place. And there's really something you can do to change the dominance. There's ear dominance, which ear is the information being stored in. And so if you're sitting next to your child, you want to sit on their dominant side. So if they're right-handed, sit on their right side, so you're talking into their right ear, and vice versa. If they're left-handed, sit on their left side. This will help this auditory storage go into the right place. So I would just recommend really researching and finding out a little bit more about that. And I do, as we're doing the podcast, we're changing a lot of those into the YouTube and putting the visual, and so they can also look on the YouTube channel for how to test for dominance.
Okay, so right now that would be a podcast that's on your site, thebraincoach.com already?
Braincoachtips.com.
Braincoachtips.com. Great. There was another question back to the one about the phonics one, the comprehension. She said, what is the link to, was that to the auditory processing test? I think you can find that on your website, right, Jan?
Yes, it's a button on the home page. It says free test kits.
Yep. I've used it myself. All right, I've got a long one here. I'm going to read it. It says, my daughter has only the left hemisphere of her brain, new as September 2015, and surgery reset her brain back to laying in a crib in China for the first 3 years of her life. Educating her daily is a major challenge because she wants to just sit and watch the world go on around her. We just had testing and was told that she has a very low IQ and not to worry about teaching her to read. I will not accept this because she is making great gains before surgery, but the trauma of the surgery, we have a harder and longer road. I'm praying for plasticity on the left hemisphere to take over the right as well.
Yes, plasticity is very, very important in this situation, and giving her the input that she needs to make those pathways is going to be vital. So if I don't know where this person lives, the most ideal thing is to see a neurodevelopmentalist and get an individualized program. And if that's not possible, we do have some mini programs that can really get you started on movements that can help organize the brain and start bringing those pathways together. And those are mini programs, early foundation kind of programs. And I do have some curriculum that I created. At one point, it dawned on me that, oh my goodness, a lot of people, if they just knew what to do, then they wouldn't have these issues later on. You know, we wouldn't have so many learning challenges if people with young children knew what to do. So that's kind of what we've been doing with my grandchildren. The curriculum is early learning foundations, and it has the neurodevelopmental activities in it, and also has it also has the math. It includes math. So depending on where the child is, anywhere from preschool, I've had a lot of children, people with Down syndrome use the Early Learning Foundations 1 because it's teaching quantities and accuracy on counting and number recognition and things like that. But it takes them through the auditory processing and the lower level brain organization and those things that build their hand strength so that they can write. You know, oftentimes we're frustrated because they're not writing more neatly, but you have to have those muscles to be able to write. So it has those kinds of things in it. And I did see it come up that she was in Washington State.
Yes.
And one of my colleagues goes there, and her organization is called Hope and a Future.
Okay.
And you might get in touch with her for an individual evaluation. She is wonderful to give you exactly what you need where the child is right then.
Mm-hmm.
I do the same thing in Texas and in other areas where I travel, but she is the one in Washington.
Awesome. That's great. I have another question. It says, what if there is a cross-body dominance throughout the body?
All right, so with dominance, you want to start with the hand, and if there's still mixed-handedness, then you look at genetics. First of all, you are, the genetics is predisposed to be either right or left. Now, there's a small percentage of individuals that have genetically mixed dominance, but even if they do, it's better to choose one and go on that one side to have everything lined up. So one thing that can really help that hand dominance is to do those lower level organization kind of activities that I was talking about that are in the mini programs that we have on our store. So that might be something to look at first and see if that doesn't help. And if there's not anybody that's left-handed in the family genetically, then they're probably not left-handed. But you got to kind of be careful because there's some closet lefties, like my dad. When he was in school, they just slapped his hand and made him sit on it
yes.
because they didn't want him writing with his left hand. And so he appeared to be a right-handed person, but he was really a left-dominant person. So he had a lot in his older years. He had to do a lot of coping and compensating to function as well as he could. He's a very smart individual, but it was taking a long time.
Yeah, she wrote that they have a lot of left and ambidextrous. So, yeah.
So that means there's a lot of genetics there, and it's possible that they could be left-handed. And a lot of people are ambidextrous because they are in a right-handed world, and we're kind of prejudiced against lefties. The scissors don't work in your left hand, and things like that. So we have to be careful to give supplies that will help. But doing those lower level organizations helps the central nervous system establish so that dominance, that true hand dominance, can come out.
That's fascinating. I guess I've never really looked into that. So I'm glad that you were able to answer her question because I wouldn't have been able to. Awesome. Well, do we have any other questions? I see that we have 6 viewers on right now, which is great for our first broadcast. I'm really excited. And that's amazing. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I have questions for you to talk about. I know that a lot of people talk about, testing their child. What types of things would you, I guess, recommend, as far as you talked about auditory processing being that underlying thing. What are some other cues that we may write off as parents to just say, well, that's just the way they are? You talked about behavior, or maybe that you see a lot of parents try to solve in the not so efficient way is that they probably could, that are kind of, I guess, the hot points of oh, maybe they shouldn't be doing that. I think I made a lot of those mistakes when I was homeschooling. Now my 2 oldest are adults, and they lived through my mistakes.
Well, one thing I see a lot, this was an example with one of the kiddos that we work with, we see a lot of kids that have central detail vision issues, that where they just don't see well right in the center. They use their peripheral more. And this particular child was very smart, and he could do math well above his age level and everything. And his parents were convinced that he was just lazy and careless. So that's how they judged him. But what was really happening is that his central detail vision didn't work well, and so that hole in his vision here made it difficult for him to see the signs. So he would add when he was supposed to subtract, and multiply when he wasn't supposed to, and different things like that, and get his problems wrong because of that kind of thing. And so that's a developmental thing that's really pretty easy to fix. On our Neuro-developmental DVD that we have on our store, that's a 2-hour, I guess you would say, education in testing your child for different things, like does their convergence work? If people, if they skip lines and you're upset with them, just read to the end of the line and come back over here. But if their tracking isn't working good or their central vision doesn't work good, then they can't do that. Another thing that would be affected is being able to write on the line and put their letters on the line. Oftentimes they can't do that because they can't really see the line well. So again, if you go through that Neuro-developmental DVD and test for the different things, the processing, test for the convergence, test for, and look at the different things that are involved with the central vision, then it'll tell you what to do to fix those areas. And so working from the foundation makes their function better.
Definitely. Yeah, that could take years of frustration out of your life and your child's.
It really can. I mean, that's the thing that I when I go to conferences, and I'm going to a number of conferences this year, we'll have those on our website. So if you're close to those areas, you might be able to come and see us and talk with us in person. But it's just interesting how when you know about these things, you just look at your child totally differently. It's not necessarily that they're being ornery, and they're sometimes I say they're not little sadistic beings trying to keep information from you. They're really struggling.
Yeah. That's awesome. I have one question that just came in, and she said, I'm a little late, but do you have any suggestions for helping a child who struggles with attention and impulsivity?
Yes. Okay, so you missed the part about the auditory processing. Oftentimes that is a key component to a foundational thing that is just not there in their realm. So, younger children do things very impulsively. So if they're 10, 11, or 12, and they have a processing of a 4-year-old, that doesn't mean they have an intelligence of a 4-year-old or their intelligence is hampered or anything. It just means that their processing is not up to speed. And you should have at least a 7-digit span or processing ability for a 7-year-old or older. So this can be huge in the impulsivity realm because they just don't see the big picture. When you don't hold the picture pieces together, the big picture does not really enter your realm of thinking, and you just do things that are kind of impulsive. So auditory processing is so huge in both of those areas, being able to stay on task and that impulsivity as well.
Right. And if you're joining us late, then you should also know that that auditory processing test kit is free on Jan's website. So if you go to Little Giant Steps, you'll find that. So I have a question here. It says, my son says his left eye looks dusty. Could that be related? We're having trouble with him cooperating with the doctor. I'm assuming that's vision.
Yes. Okay. Looks dusty. He is saying that it's looking different, and it could be that central vision is not working as well in that eye. If oftentimes, like if they have a eye that doesn't work as well, then they're going to choose the other eye for their dominant eye. So this is a problem when they are left-handed, especially, and they need to be using that left eye. So that's where it would be most important. But it's interesting. Children have different ways of expressing things. You know, I had one that said, "My hand feels fluffy. How can I make my letters if my hand feels fluffy?" And that was his brilliant way of saying, this pathway from my brain to my hand does not work. And I don't know how to move it. And so when they did some things like the deep pressure to help those pathways establish, then now he's a dentist doing oral surgery with both hands. So it's really about, I believe the neurodevelopmental approach is about releasing the full potential of the individual.
That's amazing. Yeah. And it's so easy to miss, though, because we get so caught up in the school. And I think that's the main point we wanted to bring everyone back to, as you know, we're kind of wrapping up here, is that your homeschooling is so much more than just teaching your kids the subjects, and especially if they struggle. It's about getting to the bottom of what they're struggling with and really helping them and letting them know too that you're there to be their help, not to make their life worse. Because a lot of times we make it worse because we're so busy trying to shove school into them and make them obey and do things the way we want them to do them. And they're a unique little individual. So
definitely a learning curve for each one of us, for sure.
Definitely, yes. Well, Jan, I want to thank you for joining us, and just thank you all of you who have joined us via live stream on our Facebook support group. That is SPED Homeschool support group on our closed Facebook group, which you can find on our public Facebook page. And we're going to be doing this every week. Next week, we have Steve Demme from Matthew C. joining us, and that'll be exciting. He's going to talk about what he's learned in the last 30 years of special needs parenting, which I'm excited to find out because he wants to do it off the cuff. So it'll be fun. But thank you again, Jan. It's just been a pleasure, and I'm sure everyone here, Amy says thank you. But yeah, we just had a great time. A wonderful conversation. I just enjoyed this time, and I hope that our audience has too.
Yeah, it's just this is just the tip of the iceberg. So keep pressing in, learn more, because you can change your child's life.
Amen. All right. Well, good night, everyone, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.